Hello there and welcome back to our little channel. It has been a little while since we've done one of these market updates for you, mainly because we've had our summer holiday, we've had our break in France and Spain, and as you'll know, we had a few little problems on that trip this year, but fingers crossed that is resolved, and I'll do a separate vlog for you on how we got on with our Fiat Professional workshop and dealer coming up soon. There's a lot gone on in the marketplace really for motorhomes over the summer. We've lost two sales outlets, one to an administration, one has taken the opportunity to jump out, and I've done a couple of shorts on that for you. That's Adventure Leisure Vehicles up in Cumbria has gone, they went into administration, and Heart of England Motorhomes down in West Northamptonshire, they've decided to close the doors on sales. I'm also aware that there is another dealer potentially looking at selling out as a going concern. So a lot of change again, adding to the pressures of the market right now. So where are we? What are things looking like across the summer of 2025? I think the first thing to say is for some dealers, they've had quite a buoyant summer, particularly with selling the used vehicles. There's been a good turnover for many, and where we're seeing the lack of sales and the lack of turnover on forecourts is probably with some of those more stubborn dealers who really aren't wanting to do anything to shift their stock. If they continue as they are, it's only going to go one way for them. The market is starting to change, so I think the tide is starting to turn, but is it turning enough? That's the bit I'm not quite sure about, but there are some positive signs that the rebalancing is definitely on its way. So for the first time in many months, and you've seen me tracking certain vehicles through with our tracker, and I'll come back to that in a moment, we are starting to see a slight reduction in prices for some of the used of those that I am tracking for the first time over the 6 months or so that we've been doing that through 2025, and I'll bring those to life for you in a moment. But there is a bit of pressure here. All the manufacturers have been quite keen over the summer to get their 2026 models out there. A raft of changes, a raft of supposedly new vehicles coming, and I will pick that up in a new vehicle vlog later in September. But with that reveal, if you like, across Eldis, across Coachman, across Swift, we are seeing that they're trying to get the appetite for that next round of vehicles. So that is also putting a pressure on 2025 stock, still a fair bit of 2024 stock, as well as the used. So multiple layers of pressure starting to come through again, and a slight softening in some of those used prices is what's keeping that going. Be interested to see where that market goes for the new as we get past the NEC show in October. But we'll do that in a separate vlog. So pressure is coming down, and I think this is where we are starting to see some dealers are doing the right thing by wanting to move their stock through on their forecourt and get it sold, particularly as we're entering towards the end of the season. Good summer for most, season end coming up. As I say, new stock to whet appetites for 2026 coming through. Some dealers are making the most of that. And what I want to do in this vlog then is bring to life some of those examples I've found where money is starting to be saved and the pricing is starting to come down. I guess what you can see is the inflationary effect on used motorhomes. And I want to take 2019 as a real example here, because we bought a 2019 Bailey Autograph on the 75-2 in 2021, and it was 2 years old. And at that point in time, we paid just over the £50,000 for it. So let's have a look at some 2019 models to see how they fare now. Bear in mind, they are now 6-year-old motorhomes. So let's start with that model. A Bailey Autograph 75-2 on a 2019. Currently, the average price for those on dealer forecourts is around £48,000, which is only a couple of grand less than what we paid 4 years ago. An Adria Coral at 59, a Swift car at 45, An Eldis Encore 255 at 43. It's not a bad buy. A Bailey Autograph 75-4. So that's the same as ours, but with the 4 belts. I'm seeing them around 45, 46. Eldis Evolution 175 around 45k. So over the last 4 years, you can see what the pandemic effect did in lifting all these prices. They've still got a way to go to come back down, because these are not far off what that price was 4 years ago. So I think with everything, you've got to accept that there is an inflationary cost here across the whole market, whether that's used cars, used motorhomes, whatever. But you can't get away from the fact you've got a vehicle attached to this. That's part of it. And I think just look for the best buy you can and shop around, because there are plenty to choose from still out in the market. Interestingly though, there are some good buys to be had. I've seen a 2023 Bailey Adamo, so a couple of years old, just under 60k. I've seen an Alliance on a 2021, so 6th birth, at 45,000. And Auto Trails seem to be holding quite well across the market as well. So you can get into a 4-year-old F-Line for mid-40s. So there are some good buys, but you've got to wade through the higher price tickets that aren't necessarily where they should be. Vehicles that are sort of pre-2015, it's still an interesting space, and there is a little bit of softening down there, but anything sort of pre-2015 still seems quite expensive for what it is. We have to remember these are 10 plus years, and we're now seeing vehicles from 2011, 2010 sitting at the prices you could have paid for a 2013, 2014, sort of 18 months ago. So that end of the market, I don't think has righted itself just yet. There was probably a lot of part exchanges, a lot of offloading. There is a lot of motorhomes sitting through the brokers as well. So, the motorhome depot, .com, the online broker, they're trying to sell a lot of stuff for folk. And in the absence of a used price guide, I think people are struggling to know where to pitch them, and looking at things that are on forecourts at dealer prices, it all just seems a little bit out of kilter, particularly at that lower end, where people have been encouraged to offload their vehicles through brokers to try and sell them privately, where some dealers have not been wanting to take that older stuff in part exchange. So there's a whole, mixed bag at that sort of pre-2015. Then when you get into the stuff that sits between 2015 and 2020, again, there's a bit of a free-for-all going on. There's a variance, shall we say, between prices from one dealer to another, which is why I've tried to look at an average price across. So there is a bit of bargaining power for you as a buyer if you do look across the whole market and go, look, I can find examples elsewhere that are priced more competitively. So there is some of this starting to come through, and there are some of the reductions of £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 being knocked off some of this used stock. But it is a little bit all hit and miss in that window of 2015 to 2020. Sort of post that, you can start now to see a bit more of a sliding scale coming through with the stuff from 2020 to 24 and even some of the 25 models that are used and back on forecourts. So you can see a sliding scale, but I don't think some of the variance is still quite right because of this kind of turbulence at the lower end of the market. They're still trying to pitch a little bit too much in the middle ground. And again, I'll give you some examples of that. So I've seen some Swift Escape 694s, so the island bed model. You can pick some of them up on a 2023, 2024 in the mid 60s now, and only a few months ago some of those were punching at low 70s. So there's a nudge down there. So it makes stock from 2017, 2018, 2019, albeit they'll have been a former generation of the 694. But a 2019 model at 55,000 is now a 6-year-old van. So for 10k more, you can get into a 6-year newer van. Worth thinking about. And this is where that middle ground of the 2015 to 2020 stock is just a little bit all over, because you can then get a 2017 Escape 694, for example, at sort of 45,000. So that sliding scale that comes up in that sort of 2019, 2020, 21, 22 stock, just the punching the prices in where they want to. Whereas lower down, we can see a bit more of a sensible variance. But this is the stuff you've got to weigh up. You could probably get a little bit newer right now because of some of the discounting coming through than you perhaps thought you could by going for some of this older stock, because I still think £55,000 for a 6-year-old Swift Escape 694 is slightly balmy money, if I'm being honest with you. There is some newer stock coming through as well. I've seen a couple of dealer registered up vehicles. That's interesting, following the kind of car industry market, with just like a couple of 100 miles on them. I've seen a 25 Escape 694 at 86 and one at 87, and they were 93 and 90 respectively for the spec that they're sitting on. And bear in mind, these prices from Swift are ramping up again for their 2026 models. So really buy wisely if you're looking at this. I strike hard for a deal from your dealer if you're particularly looking at some of the stock now. Because the new models are coming, that always brings stuff down. Secondly, they ain't that different for 2026, so you might as well buy the 2025 model and go for it. So that's where we are in a kind of real example around that middle ground. And I've got lots of examples I'm going to put in the screen now where there are some discounts from some of the dealers. So that just leaves me with having a quick look at our tracker, and I'll drop that into the screen now, and I will narrate that for you with just some of what we are seeing with some of those particular models. But you definitely can see a slide. Now, one of the biggest slides I thought was going to come from Eldis. I think that was already on its way. I think knowing that moving into 2026, they've got a completely new construction for their vehicles based on what was coming through with the Avalon. So they're getting away from this timber construction. Just basically, it's a new approach. In terms of Swift, though, there seems to be quite a bit of offloading of Swift motorhomes. There's certainly a lot of them about, and those are the prices that seem to have taken the biggest dip. And I'm not surprised, given our own experience with that. Build quality and so on is not great. I don't think they're listening to the customers, and I think when you look at the 2026 models, that still applies. So much of the same old, same old. So I can see that continuing to be an issue going forward. So something to consider there if you are a Swiftie and are looking at those. Prices are coming down. I think if you're looking for something that's a few years old, you might find one that's had its niggles through, but you might get a better price and a better deal on something that's 5, 6, 7 years old compared to some of the more recent stuff. But a notable change there. So there we are. That's where we are this month, and I will update again towards the end of September before we get to the NEC in October. I'll have another glance through where the prices are going now that the main summer season is through. And as ever, if you want to ask any questions, if you want to add any comments from what you're seeing, experiencing out on the market, you know I'll do my best to answer those in the comments. That's always welcome. I enjoyed that conversation that we have on the channel. So thank you. We will see you very soon. Take care.